This is a recording for Mining Memories on Tuesday the 5th of November 2013. My name's Robert Portman and I'm interviewing Ron Young. So first of all, Ron, can you tell me where and when you were born?
Well, I was born in Chesterfield at Scarsdale Hospital up at Newbold Road. Mainly I think because my mum's parents originated from Chesterfield, even though at that time mum and dad lived out in Whitwell, so that was why I was, shall we say, born out of the parish. Yeah.
And you grew up in Whitwell, Ron?
I grew up in Whitwell, and we lived on New Street on Bakeston Moor, little row of half a dozen terraced houses on the sort of south side of the parish. There was myself, mum and dad, and then my father's father, my granddad, Young, he lived there as well. And there were no other children, so it was just me that they had to suffer with.
And did you have any friends or family members who were involved in the mining industry?
Yes, my father, he worked in the mining industry all of his life, from being 14 until he managed to get early retirement. When he got up to 60, they were cutting things back, which was I think it was just before the big miners' strike. So he was out of the industry by then, but he worked in the industry all his life. There were neighbours who worked there, and of course they had kids of my age as well.
Okay, so the people you knew that worked in mining, where did they work?
They were all in at Whitwell Pit. I did meet, when I was in school days, I did meet somebody who worked at Oxcroft, but that was just somebody that I made an acquaintance with on the bus, as it were. But they were all working at Whitwell Colliery, just over the hill from where I was living. And
the people that you knew who worked in mining, what sort of different jobs and roles did they have?
Right. Our next door neighbour was Eric Cooper, and he was I think it was the NUM secretary for Whitwell. So he worked part of the time on the surface. I don't think he went down the pit very often, but all the other folks that I knew that worked at Whitwell, they nearly all worked underground.
Do you know what sort of jobs they did underground?
I don't know what jobs the other kids' parents did underground. I believe that there were some face workers, same as turners from bottom of New Street. But,
and the ones that worked underground, first of all, did they talk much about the work, whether they enjoyed it or any good or bad experience that they had?
They didn't really talk a great deal about their work. The only one that I could get a really deep conversation with about mining was my father, because he wasn't a phase worker. I believe he had been a phase worker in his younger days. Father was a chap called Teddy Young. He had been a phase worker, but he'd finished up with a hernia in his relatively younger days, and they always give him a lighter job, on belts, and I think it was called a button job, sort of controlling belts and cleaning up round pit bottom.
So, if your father taught you a bit about the work that did he prefer the job he got, the button work, or would he prefer to be doing face work? I
don't think he would have liked to have done face work. I think he was quite happy with what he got to do there. He did. I'll put it this way: he didn't want much in life to make him happy. It wasn't one of these that went out every night and sort of got shut of it all at Royal Oak, at local pub. He liked his family life, and as long as he could have a decent family life and do what he wanted to, that was all that made him happy.
So if we think back to when you were growing up and your father was working in mining. Can you, from your perspective, remember what their normal working day might have been like?
Well, he did all 3 shifts. He would do, more often than not, he would be, well, over the years he did the 3 shifts. More often than not, he would just be doing 2 of them, shall we say, days and nights. He didn't like afters very much, but either days and nights or days and afters on alternate weeks. It would be either gone when I got up to go to school if it was on days, and then back at home when I got home after school, or he would go out early evening and sort of arrive back, and it was a case of tiptoeing around the house while you were getting your breakfast and all through the day if it was on nights. But it would sometimes tell me about different things that had gone off, but I'll put it this way, I can't remember a lot of the things that he told me, but one of the things that he did tell me that I always remember was when I was getting up towards the age of leaving school and thinking of leaving to get a job. He did threaten me, a bit tongue-in-cheek, I know, but he said he'd give me 6 laceholes if I even thought of going down pit. He didn't want me to be going into industry, so I think that he could see that it was going to go into decline over the years that after he'd retired.
And with your father working shifts and growing up in a household where your father worked shifts, did you have a preference for his working pattern, so when you got to see more of him or something like that?
I didn't like it when it was on afters, because I mean if it was on days, I'd see him in evening before we both all went to bed, and then got up the following day. If it was on nights, I would see him for a couple of hours, and then he'd clear off. I'd be going to bed, and then of course he'd be sleeping while I was at school. So I think I preferred the days and nights one, and I think he did as well, because he could spend a bit more time with me than when he was on the afters shift.
Did you do much as a family together in this time that you had together when
you
shifted in class with school?
Oh, we would always try and do things as a family, whether it was going out for day trips. Father didn't have a car, so it was always make sure the buses tied in with everything. So, you know. But we always tried to go places together, go for a walk in the evening, not this time of year obviously, or this type of weather, but we'd always try and get to a walk in one day or both days over the weekend, either in the afternoon or the evening when he wasn't doing any extra work, any overtime, but we would always try and do things rather than do things as a family, in many cases, rather than mum and dad going out to the pub at night.
Can you remember where you went on day trips?
Oh, quite often during the summer holidays, when they used to have a train service, we'd go to Cleethorpes on the train from Worksop. That was one of the favourites. Obviously, with my mother originating from Chesterfield, we would go there, I'm not going to say every weekend, but a lot of weekends while our parents were alive. Other times that we went out that are memorable, once when we went on a trip down to Matlock, because it chucked it down with rain all the way back, and we got absolutely ruddy drowned coming back. But went out, did that. You could also, with East Midland buses, get day trips from them, so we sometimes booked on one of their trips and went out into Derbyshire or places, things like that. But We usually used to manage a couple of fairly long trips, every year, going out somewhere, and occasionally another one of my father's interests was motorbike racing. He couldn't ride a motorbike, but when his brother, my Uncle Billy, was alive, he'd sometimes go with father to different motorbike races. But if they were going in the car, they'd sometimes take me as well, which I used to enjoy. Went to Alton Park and also to Scarborough for various events. But they were the ones that really stuck in my mind, as well as having walked around the area as well.
Did you enjoy going to watch motorbike racing?
I enjoyed it, but I mean when you're sort of 10 or 11, after a while it does get a bit boring. So we'd occasionally have a walk round and see a different part of the circuit or something like that. It'd keep me out of my mother's hair, basically.
And as a community member, when you were growing up in a mining community, what did a normal day look like to you? What did you do?
When I was, shall we say, at Whitwell School, it would be a case of get up, obviously breakfast. Then in those days, kids were allowed to walk down to the school. Then back home at lunchtime, I very seldom. Well, I don't think I ever stopped for school dinners at Whitwell. And then back home at lunchtime, back to school, and then 3:45ish, clear off from school and come home, play with some of the kids from round the street that are of about my age at the time, and we'd be playing out on the street rather than even being protected inside the gardens, not like they are now. But then again, there weren't a quarter as many cars, a tenth of as many cars knocking about on the road, so it was a lot safer. Usual kind of games that kids played as well, sort of ball games, chasing games, all sorts of different things, getting into mischief that kids always like to do. As I grew older, when I got to the 11 plus stage, I didn't go to Markland, just up road. I don't know whether it was unfortunate or fortunate, in that I got a place at William Roads at Chesterfield. So it was get up, catch 8 o'clock bus and into Chesterfield. Usually arrive late, because the bus being late, get my name taken, then leave school at 4:45, catch 4:45 bus and back home at 5:30, hot tea and homework and bed. So it was as bad for me as it were for my father, which shift work then. But it was nice during school holidays when I could go out on bike and round with some of my friends then.
Where did you used to ride when you were going on your summer holidays?
Just a second, I've got something more important to do than just a second. Well, one of my favourite rides was, I wasn't one of these big long distance riders. One of my favourite rides was to go up as far as Kiverton Park Station, watch a couple of trains go through. You know what kids are like with train spotting, when they were proper steam engines. And then ride back. That was all very quiet country lanes. Or if I wanted to go a bit further afield, same as at weekend, I'd probably ride over to Trumber and have a ride through Trumber Park, back through Worksop. But they were my typical rides. Didn't come down south, much further south than Cuckney very much. It were all foreign ground when you got south of Cuckney. It's in Nottinghamshire, it's all foreign parts there, isn't it?
And when you were growing up, do you remember any large community or national events that were celebrated and how they were celebrated in your community?
I can remember there was a tea party laid on to celebrate the coronation in '53. I can't remember much about going to it, but I do remember that we were all given this mug with the crest of Her Majesty Queen on, and I've still got it somewhere in the house, but I'm not quite sure where it is. But I think all the children got it. That was about the time, of course, '53, about the time that I was due for starting school, so it was only a very small Ronald Young then at the time. And of course, what do they call that stuff that I'd got on top of my head? Hair. But yeah, it was. That's about the only thing that I can remember of any national significance. Whilst I was either at primary school or at secondary school.
What did your family tend to do at Christmas at all?
We would tend to, first of all, be having Christmas at home. When Grandma was alive, she would come over for Boxing Day, along with my mother's brother. He, at that time, worked for Electricity Board over at somewhere Manchester way, and he would come over for a day or two over Christmas with his and his wife's parents, and then on Boxing Day they would my uncle, my aunt and my cousin would drive over from Chesterfield with Grandma and Grandad and have Boxing Day with us, and then it was a sort of more mum's side of the family that we would be seeing on Boxing Day. On Christmas Day there would be more my father's side of the family showing up, because he had one immediate blood brother and then who lived in Cresswell, and then he'd got two half brothers from his mother's first marriage to a man who died when his kids were, I would guess, in the very early teens. He got two brothers from that and two half sisters from that marriage as well, and we would more often than not see some of those family members as well over, on the sort of Christmas Day type period. But it was just a normal, very much an at-home Christmas. We didn't go out. We would sometime over the Christmas period, we'd more often than not try and go down to Nottingham or somewhere like that to see Panto. Didn't go to Sheffield very much for Panto. It was more often than not Nottingham for some reason. But that was, it was just a very immediate family type Christmas.
Have you got any particularly memorable activities or things you might have done together at Christmas at home, or any pantomimes you really enjoyed in Nottingham?
I think that there's none of them really. None of the pantos stick out in a great extent. The only one that really does stick out was actually when the school went to a panto. We did it. That was when we went over to Sheffield as a school party, and there was Ronnie Hilton in, and I think it was Cinderella that we went to see, and it was only, I think, because it was Ronnie Hilton, and then a few years later we went along to see him when he was performing at Bridlington, and I went round back and got his autograph for some unknown reason. But I can't really remember what they were at Nottingham. I just remember going down there and going to see them. Same as it were, they usually have a big name and then a supporting cast of the others.
You mentioned earlier that you knew someone who was a member of the NUM,
Yeah,
worked above ground.
Yeah.
Do you know what they did for the NUM, or what they offered their members at all?
Eric was, as well as being MUM secretary, he was also a councillor. I'm not quite sure which councils he was on, whether he was on parish, county, or Clown rural district as it then was. I think he was on Clown and public parish. I think he did have a flirtation with county, but I can't swear to it without looking it up in another book that I've got at home. It might tell me there, but he would. He was a typical councillor in that he would give assistance to people who wanted things sorting out with, so it's a life above ground. If it was a Clown RDC type complaint with the council itself over housing or whatever work he had to do with them. And then he was also pretty well appreciated for his NUM membership. I think it was he awarded the OBE? It was one of the, it was awarded something at the Christmas medals, name pulling out of the hat sort of thing. I just can't remember which one it was, but he always liked to try and do things for the parishioners around different jobs, different things that they wanted carrying out.
Do you know what sort of things they want carrying out?
Well, with Clown RDC work, it would be more often than not people who were having problems with their tenancies that they wanted sorting out. I didn't really come into a great deal of contact with him on that side. The house that we lived in, obviously it wasn't Father's house. It was a rented property. Nearly everybody lived in rented properties then, and it was in later years at least, it was a chappie over at Retford that we rented from. But we had to go along and occasionally sort problems out with whether with him or with the landlord or his agent. But so the local councillor really couldn't do a great deal for us, even though he was in under the same landlord for that matter. But it was.
You'd be quite young at the time, I imagine, because you said you were yay high, about a metre high for the coronation.
Talking English, about 3 foot high.
Can you remember the Cresswell Pit disaster, or people talking about it?
I can't remember, because I was born in 48, August 48, and was that 50 when that happened? Or was it 52? I know
it was 1950.
50, that's it,
disaster,
yeah. I know I definitely wasn't old enough to remember anything like that. The only one that I can really remember was when the cage went down at Markham, which was just after I'd been up to Orkney for the first time. So that would be about 1972, in 70s in any case, when Markham Pit disaster. Was it 8 men were killed when cage went down shaft, and that's the only one that I can really remember. And I know that my father didn't say a great deal, but it was something that always concerned him, going down the shaft on that score. But of course he managed to get his retirement in the late 70s. So just before the miners' strike, he managed to get out of it all. He was very happy at that as well.
So we'll move on to the strikes in the 1980s, especially the 1984 strike.
Yeah.
You said your father got out of mining just prior to that.
Yes.
Do you have any experiences of the strikes yourself, so living in the community? Can you recall anything in particular about them, how they affected you?
Well, at that time, I'd just changed job. I changed in 81 when I first started at Butterley Brickworks, as it then was, at Allerton. And I had to drive there every day. And of course, when the strike was on, they were somewhat concerned about folks from some of the more militant areas, because of course Allerton Colliery in Nottinghamshire, where the UDM later held power, they were at times still working, weren't they? And the first couple of times when I was driving down, there were police checkpoints down at Budby, where the 616 joint road from works up. So flag me down, have a look. Where are you coming from? Where are you going to? And what you're doing down there? I had quite a long conversation first time. Second time, he recognised me from the day before, and I was able to, depending on what was going off, whether he wanted to chat or not. But sometimes I'd get stopped, sometimes I wouldn't. I'd probably get stopped a certain number of times just to keep numbers up, as it were. I don't know what he thought, because at the time I was learning Russian, and I'd got this here Russian textbook on the seat side of me. So I at times I wondered whether I ought to really put it in back seat at car, but I thought, blow it, I'll not. It can stop there, and if he wants to ask me a question about it, I'll tell him, as I've got big L plates on. So I would go through there with my Russian textbook. That's really the only time. And then of course at Allerton there would be the police vans as I drove through Allerton village itself, just by the colliery entrance, where one of the entrances of course was roughly where Tesco is now in Allerton. And of course I would drive past there, and there would be a blooming long line of police vans parked up well into double figures, just to make sure that there were no naughty boys from up north going down and trying to stop the men from UDM members who worked at Allerton from going down there and trying to stop things happening at Limestone Pit. But that's the only real time that I came across any of them. There were some folks that had gone to school with, even William Rhodes' days at Chesterfield. There were a couple of lads that had got jobs down pits. I'll be honest, I didn't really stay in contact with them, because their shift pattern was entirely different to mine. I was always working in a laboratory at works up till late 70s, early 80s, and really I've never been one for going out drinking in pubs, so it was just a case that our paths didn't really cross very often until later on. And of course, having a split associations with going to school at one place and then living sort of 12 mile away, you can't really keep up with schoolmates when you're in your secondary years. So I dropped out of a lot of the local friendships, because I was always out at parish in daytime. So I didn't really come into contact with many of my folk at the same age group when I was in later life. That, I remember you from school, and that was about as far as it got.
Right, just to finish off, Ron,
yeah.
We'll talk about the area after the mining industry effectively ended.
Yeah.
And you said that you went to school with some people who went into the mining industry.
Yeah.
You lost touch until
Very much
later
lost
on.
touch, yeah.
Do you know what they did after mining?
I will be honest, I don't remember where they went to. At work, especially at the brickyard at Arlington, I think we did get a couple of blokes of my age group who were in the mining industry, but not many. And I didn't really get talking to them a great deal. But some of them went into various production jobs. I don't really know where a lot of them finished up.
How did you feel about the end of the mining industry?
I still am sorry that we've lost what was a useful industry. Now we buy the same blooming stuff of a lower grade, in fact, at times, from bits of Eastern Europe. It is a great sadness that we've lost it. But political things happened with a certain miners' leader who still has his posh house and does everything. Mr. Scargill, I'll use his name. He still has his posh house and manages to get everything he wants out at NUM, but some of the folks who worked there all their life and they don't, they've got the, I'll not use the vulgar word, but they've got the mucky end at stake.
And post-mining, you've still remained in the area.
Yeah.
Are there any particularly memorable experiences about how the area's changed at all?
Well, we're getting a lot more people moving into the area from outside, and there does seem to be a greater interchange of people within, well, around the area, people moving out to get work, and people from outside moving in. Sometimes not always an advantage, but we have got a fairly great interchange of people in the area now for housing and what have you, which I must admit I don't like to see it at times, and also with the demise of a lot of the industries, including those that I was associated with, both the brickmaking side and the refractories side, with the demise of those industries, we are losing our production quite often to places in the Middle East, Far East, even some of the ex-communist states are taking some of the jobs. We're becoming a nation of people who either done out and live on dole all the time, or else we've imported people who are working for a hell of a lot less than the British people would do, and I think doing some of the native British people out of work. I think we're getting a little bit too political there, but I'm not bothered.
That's okay. Have you got any personal memorable experiences from the 1980s onwards in regard to the area and mining?
Just trying to think. There's nothing really that sticks out in my mind on that score.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we can finish there then,
Yeah.
Ron. Thank you very much.
Okay.
So this has been a recording for Mining Memories on Tuesday the 5th of November 2013.